Professor Emeritus, right? That's right. Oh, sorry, I left my mother tongue. Okay. Professor Susan from the University of Liverpool. A round of applause for her.
It's really great to be here. I mean, I've enjoyed all the process that's interactive virtually, but nothing beats being here, seeing you, smiling, interacting and sharing knowledge and passions. And I thought I was a passionate person until I heard that last talk. So I'll try not to be too boring. Okay, so could I have the slides on, please? So that's what I'm going to be talking about in 5 minutes. What I have to do, and I did tell Latif about it, I have to just make a very short, very brief reminder that actually we need to thank Elsevier, the publisher, who gave $3,000 US. And so I have to say, so you can fall asleep these next 2 minutes, I don't mind, but I'm editor-in-chief of one of their journals, which is this one. This background is really bad for showing slides. You need just to play my background, guys. If you can tell that, you'll tell that. Anyway, this journal is published by Elsevier and it's open access. What I thought could be interesting is just to spend 3 slides reminding us. We think open access is a good thing, don't we? Oh yes, open society, open science, it's great. It's great because you can have it for free, it would appear, except that, so as long as you've got internet access, you can read the research for free. That's why I said, yeah, we like open access. And publishers, like us here, charge an article publishing charge, which covers the expenses of making it look like a proper journal and all nice and doing the peer review, etc., etc. And these charges are paid by the authors now, by your institution, funding bodies, or other sources. So, yeah, it's a good thing, isn't it, open access? Or is it? So, national societies that have their own journals are actually now being really squeezed because the drop in subscription income has gone down and down and down. They have to now charge authors for publication, but that money in is a lot less than what libraries worldwide provide. So I've said there about my own society, the Physiological Society. It owns the Journal of Physiology. They're losing subscription income, less money to support meetings and members. And I think we should be grateful that the TPS, as well as the DPG, as well as the Physiological Society of Japan and the American Physiological Society all dipped into their reserves to support this meeting. So as president of IUPS, those national societies will thank. Yes. So, no pleasure. So then, as part from income going down, what happens if you can't pay to publish? What would you do? That's not really talked about very much. The second thing is, open access is a good thing, isn't it? But actually, can it damage your career? And I'm talking here, of course, about predatory journals. So, for those who are not aware, and I don't want to make the young people in the audience feel very disheartened, but I think awareness of good journals and not such good journals, publishing can make money. If there's money involved, people, not always good people, are going to try and be involved. So you don't want to have all your hard-earned money going down the toilet as a researcher and fed to this predatory publisher. So what can you do? Because you don't want, especially again to the younger feminists, you don't want all the hard work of your research to be sent to a journal that's oh yes, and we'll tell you it's all fine in about a week and we'll publish it. And they're not necessarily peer reviewed, it's not good quality. And when people are looking at your CV and they see an article in certain journals, they just think, It's not worth anything, that one. There's no peer review. It's not high quality. So what we can do is organisations or websites like this one, the thinkchecksubmit.org. And so think about where you're submitting and then say, okay, I want to check it out. So go to places like this, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and see if where you're thinking about is a good open access journal. And that's really critical to not wasting your money, and then submit. And you know, you get peer review, you may love it or hate it, but it's generally a positive for the system. So that was a thank you again to some of the people and organisations supporting the meeting. Let's get on to what makes me more passionate, which is the myometrial. And what I want to do is remind, because I know not everybody can remember their physiology and reproductive tract and childbirth. So let's start with some overview of smooth muscle, the myometrium. Move on to excitation, contraction, coupling. I then want to talk about the uterine environment, so this moves more into research and the regulation of contractility by what I'm calling an intrinsic feedback mechanism. And then trying to translate this, because throughout the world there's still a lot of problems for women having babies. So, to remind you, it's amazing pregnancy. Women are amazing. They have this uterus, they don't have to use it for pregnancy, but when they do, it is amazing how it adapts, how it protects the fetus, and then of course how it delivers the fetus. This is not such a pretty picture, but this is a real live, well not live obviously, this is a real human uterus, and what you can see, this thickest layer here is the muscle layer, the myometrium. It's a really meaty organ, and it's smooth muscle. There's the endometrium, that's the lining that's shed during the menstrual cycle, and a cervix, hopefully you can feel baby in when you're pregnant. So, how does that look if we go to textbook knowledge? I said there are smooth muscle cells, so to remind you, it is a muscle, smooth muscle, but it doesn't have striations. So we have pigmented filaments, but not arranged in striations. You have communication between the cells, the gap junctions, that link the cells electrically and chemically, surface membrane, the pumps, exchangers, alveoli, and the intracellular organelles, including the cytoplasmic reticulum, which is a store of calcium. What I want you to see is that is not a typo about how big in the pregnant uterus these cells are. They are huge. We tend to, when we teach physiology, and we talk about smooth muscle, we tend to think it's very small, delicate little things, you know. Actually, nothing beats the size of the pregnant uterine myocytes. 0.5 millimetre long. Really big, powerful cells. Now, Liverpool Women's Hospital, where my lads are, or were, it's quite easy to get myometrial biopsies because there's lots of caesarean sections performed. So obviously with informed consent and with ethical committee approval, lots of women in Liverpool will say, yes, of course you can have a tiny, tiny bit of myometrium for research. So that's a really great resource, thousands and thousands every year. And what you can do from that, obviously, is dissect them. You can do smaller or larger organ bank time studies, measuring force. You can do it very tiny. You can load the strips to measure intracellular calcium or pH. We can have humans, but also rodent models to work on. I'll say just a tiny bit about some novel agents from nature, because I know that is of interest to some people in this audience. We can dissect out, when I say we, what I mean is younger postdocs who've got good motor control still, yes, they can dissect out from these biopsies the blood vessels and study those in myographs. Or we can take that and we can digest it with enzymes to get to the single cell level. Here's one loaded with a calcium sensitive indicator. And what I like is even down to the single cell, we've got a mini uterus. It has a rise of calcium and it contracts. as long as it's freshly dissociated. So it's a reasonable tissue to work with. There's a variety of many other methods, which we don't do all of them, but we do quite a few, especially electrophysiology on those single cells. So, my take-home message is that these are powerful, active cells, myogenic or spontaneously active. So I can take out those pieces of uterus from the woman, the rat, the mouse, put it in an organ bag, treat it kindly, and they will contract spontaneously. I don't need nerves, I don't need hormones. So the activity is myogenic, it comes from the muscle itself. And so they're spontaneously active. Nerves and hormones can alter that pattern, but they're not essential. And that's just showing a group of myocytes in the bundle there, and you can label them, as I've said, you can load them with calcium indicators. For those of you who do electrophysiology, you can see the very large inward currents these cells produce, so that's calcium going into the cells, producing that large current. And you're looking there at the calcium within that internal organelle, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And you can see it's close to the membrane, and there's lots of calcium in there, ready to help contraction. So I've talked about that large calcium current. I want to say that it's an L-type calcium channel. So the voltage-sensitive ones, you can block the channel with drugs like nifedipine, which are used in medicine. So here's a voltage-trapped cell. You depolarize. What you see, if you've loaded it with the calcium-sensitive indicator, is this rise in calcium. And there's the calcium current associated with that calcium entry. If I block the channel with nifedipine, depolarize, no rise of calcium now, and no calcium current. If I'm looking at contraction or intracellular calcium, you can see it goes nicely until you block the calcium channels. So A1 importance of calcium channels in myometrium for their activity. This is another bundle of smooth muscle cells loaded with the indicator, and I want to just emphasize the importance of EC coupling, membrane potential calcium force. So this one will see different activities. So those are the calcium transits you're looking at, different amounts, and that's because the amount of action potentials being fired is being changed. So now we've got the changes in electrical activity, which are needed for calcium transients, and they are in turn what gives you the output, which is contractions. So if you want to alter contractions of the uterus, you have to alter the electrical activity. I said already that you can change that with nerves and hormones, so oxytocin, for example, would be a stimulant there, but the uterine environment can also act to inhibit. And it's this that I think is quite an important factor in childbirth that we haven't given much attention to. So the uterine environment can change excitability and the effects of stimulants. Just for completeness then, the uterus goes from being largely quiescent to contractile. We still don't know all the secrets of what brings it about, that we go, but we do know we need coordinated contractions for delivery. The myocytes get more depolarized, and the cells connected through the gap junctions, more communication, more coordinated contractions. Labour. Even if English isn't your first language, labour means to most of us hard work, isn't it? Hard labour we want to avoid, but that's what your mothers did for you. They went mostly through labour. Isn't necessarily always hard, but it's a big effort. And so thank your mothers tonight, tomorrow, all they did for you back then. And what those contractions are doing is this pinker region here, cervix, and they're making it thinner, and then they are taking it up so that we end up with a birth canal that is about 10 centimetres dilated. And that takes hours and hours of hard muscular work. So when I say the myometrium is a tough muscle, It is, it has to be. It's like undergoing a marathon. So, to summarise this introduction, no striations, but it's definitely still muscle, spontaneously active rhythmic smooth muscle, electrical activity and external calcium vital for contraction. The pattern of activity is regulated by excitation, contraction, cupping, and the switch to labour is gradual and multifactorial. So, let's move on to the second part of the talk, looking at the effects of uterine environment and regulating contractility. So, the physiology of labour with a focus on myometrium. So there, this in pink here is the myometrium. See what I mean about that motor control? You see, so the tremor there. And there is the placenta, which of course is interacting with the myometrium and the fetus via the umbilicals. There it is in more detail. And what I'd like to show you is how within the myometrium, of course, are the blood vessels that are needed for the placenta and the blood there. So what you have is a situation where during labour, these contractions are very strong. And so what they're doing is, if this is the uterus contracting, and here are the blood vessels going through, they're squeezing on it, they're occluding it. And C is the leaving, so this is an in vivo recording, and we anaesthetised that, so you're looking into uterine pressure. And what you see are the very nice basic spontaneous contractions in vivo there. Put a laser Doppler flow probe alongside, and what you see that during those contractions there are significant drops in blood flow. Carries on all those hours of labour. So what you get now repeated transient hypoxic episodes. And that is normal physiology. This isn't some pathology. This is what goes on in labour. And the mother and the fetus can cope with this most of the time. I'll come on to what I mean by that in a minute. But it's something that many people are unaware of, but this is normal labour. What we know, don't we, as physiologists, we know enough biochemistry to know that actually, well, that's going to stimulate glycolysis and lactic acid production. We think, oh, that doesn't sound good, all that lactic acid. And so, what I've been interested in is the fact that there's definitely an increase in lactate during these conditions. Measured it. That is a weak acid, so we're going to expect acidification. And the more lactate you have, you know, I had 45 minutes, not 30. Yeah? But it was 45 minutes, yeah? In the program. Okay, I wish you told me earlier. I'm going to skip the introduction because this is the juicy bit. I'll do my best. Okay. This is sad. So I asked two questions in vivo. What can contractions do to pH? Can they change it? And can lactate have an effect on contractions? Certainly. This is old work, but it's a classic earnest. So it's what we're doing is, again, in vivo work, looking at those regular contractions and measuring the intracellular pH during a contraction. And what we found when we did those measurements is that in vivo, during a single contraction, you can see acidification. In vivo, single contraction, pH is changing. So the next question was, can lactate reduce the contractions? And here the work of a PhD student, Jackie, showed there's now in vitro lovely spontaneous contractions add lactate. They're certainly decreased. Make it more physiological, add oxytocin, there's the stimulation, but lactate still reduces force. And there's the mean data within the physiological range lactate will decrease contractions, even with oxytocin. How is it doing that? So you can imagine two mechanisms with lactate. One is its metabolic effects, and we're actually knowing more and more about how lactate and its transporters can have metabolic effects, or it's doing it because it's a weak acid. So, if we've got a weak acid in lactate, let's try and null that pH change. By that I mean you can add a weak base. If you add those together on that seesaw, you will get no pH change. The ladies in the room look very concerned here. Is it okay for me to carry on?
There is one who is missing, so we will...
Oh, great!
Big breath.
I'll take a breath. Wipe the sweat off. Okay, so I hope I explained that clearly enough. If you now give an acid and a base at the same time, you don't get a pH change. So let's do that. We've done that by adding ammonium chloride along with lactate. And what we see now is that without a pH change, there's no change in the contractions. In other words, it's the acidity, not the metabolic effects of lactate that are affecting contractions. So lactate acidifies and reduces force in the myometrium. As physiologists would think, well, that's no good. What's the mechanism of that? How does the acidification do that? And for that, we go back to EC coupling. Simultaneous recordings of membrane potential and force now, lovely trains of action potentials, but if you acidify, hyperpolarization, they stop, and so do to the contractions. So from that we conclude that acidification hyperpolarizes, inhibits action potentials, that reduces calcium currents, calcium entry, and reduces force. So that's the conclusion from that. That then led me to put together this, what I'm calling an endogenous feedback mechanism. So you've seen already the contractions, nice contractions. You know that actually they reduce blood flow. You've seen that. That produces hypoxia and increases lactate. That will decrease pH, you've seen that, and in turn, you've seen that will reduce contraction. As the contraction reduces, that squeeze on the blood vessels will also reduce. So now, the blood flow will start to increase, it will wash out the lactate, restore the pH, vessels dilate, so you're back to normoxia, and you're ready for the next strong contraction. And we have to go through this cycle many, many times. Why I've called it protective is if we come back to that fetus, and I was saying about normal physiology, imagine that if the contraction is too prolonged or too severe, then that clamp is not released, and then you're into a situation, very dangerous baby, fetal distress. So by having this mechanism that goes to a peak of contraction and then causes relaxation, I think it's very protective during labour. So, normal labour associated with repeated hypoxia, lactic acid, lactate important, and a feedback mechanism. So, the final part of the talk is about translation. And why I think this is important is, I think, very obvious probably to everyone in this audience. There's lots of problems worldwide associated with aberrant uterine contractions. Throughout the world, if contractions start too, let's just say how enormous the problem is. If the contractions start too early, and this is the same whether you're in the UK, the US, throughout Africa, preterm delivery, and that, as you know, can lead to death and handicap. Not always, but there is the risk of that. So contractions start too early, bad news. But also the strength of contraction is really important. If the contractions aren't strong enough, then you have what's called dysfunctional labour. The cervix won't dilate because it is that dilation that we need, and that's where you need the uterus to contract. If you're in most of the Western world and many areas of Africa, you will be fortunate enough to have access to a theatre, a surgical theatre, that can give you the emergency caesarean section, which will be the only way to deliver the baby. However, if you're not in those fortunate situations and you're miles away, this can kill women and their babies. So it's a real serious problem. As is if you don't contract properly after delivery, because all that blood that was going to the uterus will hemorrhage out if you don't stop it with a strong contraction. So we need to be much better at predicting, preventing or treating problems caused by aberrant uterine activity. And guess what? Worldwide, this huge problem. How many drugs do you think we've got? Well, that's told you there, just one. Is it even a drug? No, sir. It's oxytocin. That is all you can do. Oxytocin works about half the time to stimulate. And I couldn't say in advance whether it will help your baby work. Just try it and see, and hope it doesn't do too much harm. So, if I'm standing here and say, oh, I have this rather failing heart, it's not very good, you say, it's okay, Sue, look at these 50 drugs we can give you, we'll find the best one for you. If, many years ago, and Sarah, my uterus was failing during childbirth, oh, that's sad, yeah, well, we'll try this, we've got this one drug, oxytocin, try it, might work, might not, we can't tell you in advance, and it can actually damage you, but let's do it anyway. And so that's what it's like to be a woman. And this is why sometimes, especially get older, we get grumpier, because it's not really right, because, women, they're not a rare creature, are they, So, angry old women, surely angry about this. And if I was to get vaguely philosophical, let's ask the question, why don't we care as much about the organ that gives us life as we do the organs of life? Why as societies worldwide do we not really care about this? And this paper, so inconsistent definitions of labour progress and over-medicalisation cause unnecessary harm during birth. I can't tell you how happy I am with this paper because it's been published on Friday in the British Medical Journal. The world and his wife reads it. And even nicer is the fact, so lots of authors, some scientists, but 2 of those are from Tanzania. How brilliant is that? Yeah, so there we are. We talk about collaborations, and this is mainly the work of Scandinavian colleagues, I have to be honest there, but the little bits of science in it, and the hospital treatment, which I'm going to tell you about, comes from this. So there's our predictive feedback cycle. This is how the BMJ have redrawn it, so they're a better artist than me, and that looks quite nice. I'm sure I'll make a good version of that for later talk, but it's quite good for the ego to see it being used in this way. And what the paper is saying is, we might know now some of this, but there's still this big gap between what happens for women in labour and how much we apply the knowledge of science to women in labour. Okay, so let's move on to the translation, the final bit. So my thought was here, okay, what would happen if during all those contractions the blood vessels don't always react properly? Maybe little by little there's a decrement in how much they're relaxing. So that this part of the cycle would start to fail. And if it starts to fail, could that be a cause of dysfunctional labour? So let's investigate that, because I knew that acidifying can cause a dysfunctional labour pattern. So, working with clinical colleagues, take blood from the first uterine section of women having a C-section. Get your blood, get it analysed on the labour ward under the gas machine. Get consultant obstetricians separated from the data to say what kind of labour the women were having. Pay particular attention to group D. They were women having a caesarean section because of dysfunctional labour. Let's measure the pH now, get the data together. And what you can see is the myometrial, sorry, getting too excited, the myometrial capillary blood is really so much more acidic, significantly so. You have lots of asterisks of significance there. And only in the women labouring dysfunctional. Those having caesarean sections for other reasons, not much difference. They also had more lactate. So that's interesting. I must say, this sounds, you're probably thinking, well, we could do that, we could get rid of it. And of course, but this was the first insight, 2004, into a cause of dysfunctional labour. Rather than a clinician just saying, it happened, nothing we can do, no explanation, and that's just not good enough. So going from this, and it takes a long time, we want to translate the findings to dysfunctional labour. So remember the pH null experiment in vitro, and we do that in vivo and stop the acidification having a bad outcome in labour. Ammonium chloride's not very pleasant. A little bit better is sodium bicarbonate, another base. So now, we can, and when I say we, this is with two colleagues in Scandinavia, in Sweden. You can get to any corner shop in Sweden bicarbonate in a sachet. I'm sure you have the same in Tanzania and elsewhere. We have it in the UK. If your stomach's a bit off, if you've got a headache, you can just get these effervescent sachets. So these were known already to the women in Sweden in the trial. And we asked, can bicarbonate reverse more contractility in dysfunctional labour? So it's a small randomised controlled trial. 100 women were given the standard treatment, you know what that is, oxytocin, that's all it is. Or now, 100 randomised, we give them a drink of bicarbonate. They have an hour, and then we have to give standard treatment. And it's powered to look at labour outcome. What was interesting was maternal pH is better if they have bicarbonate. Fetal stats are better, but we weren't powered to look at that. But if you look at the number of women who could have a vaginal delivery who did not need surgery, the effects are magnificent. And what I would say is, if we think about those regions, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, this is bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, not expensive. It doesn't need electricity, you don't need to refrigerate this. You don't need 10 years of clinical training to say, let's open the sachet and put it in some water. Yeah? So this has the potential of being life-saving if it's taken up. The data has been replicated by a group in Egypt. So I'm going to skip these in the interest of time just to say ants are sociable and they produce something a bit like oxytocin. Perhaps we will get some drugs from that. Sarah Arrowsmith, who's now at Manchester Metropolitan University, is looking at that, but we have some nice papers looking at these modified oxytocin molecules. We talked about finding new drugs from natural products, so these are some collaborations I've been fortunate enough to have. So there with colleagues in Austria and Australia. There's Sajira, a former PhD student who's in Thailand, and from Nigeria, Enriched Bafar, who came to the lab to do some work with us. She's now on a scholarship and got an award in America. So hate natural products and great to collaborate. So that's the summary of that. You didn't get the sound going, did you know? Still not going, oh, such a shame, we could have had a laugh, never mind. This is a summary to say loads of questions remain. We definitely need to start translating this research. We need to infuse the next generation of physiologists and not lose girls and women. That's one of my granddaughters. You can see she's a trainee obstetrician. There's a baby inside that balloon. Look at her technique. If there was sound, you'd hear her laughing. Just look at the smile. Great one, isn't it? Future scientist and obstetrician. And I just want to say, please, thank you to all the colleagues, students and fellows over many years, and also please enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you.